All right, praise the Lord, and I'm glad you're here. A great day of worship. Thank you, praise team. Although, Robert, I have to admit something to you. I was a little distracted this morning. I had a hard time participating in worship, and the reason being, I have got a song stuck in my head. You know, I know you were leading everything else, but I have got this song stuck in my head. I woke up this morning. My head got off the pillow a little after 6:30, and I woke up with this song in my head. It's an older song. I hadn't thought of it in a while, and it just hit me, and I tell you, I was getting dressed, and I was singing the song. I was watching a little bit of news this morning. I was singing the song. On the drive to church, I was singing that song. And so I got here, and then Robert got here, and I said, Robert, I've been singing all this song all morning long. Let's do that one. And so he's been gracious enough. We're going to do it later on. It's an awesome song. It's not a song maybe a lot of people know. Just a real simple chorus. In fact, I learned it a handful of years ago, but it's just a very simple message. The song is called Yes, Lord, Yes. I don't know if some of you heard it. Maybe a lot of you haven't, but it's so simple. It goes like this. I'll say yes, Lord, yes, to your will and to your way. I'll say yes, Lord, yes. Sing it if you know it. I will trust you and obey. When the Spirit speaks to me, with my whole heart I'll agree, and my answer will be yes, Lord, yes. Oh, I love that song. That is, it's just that simple reminder of saying yes to God. And it's been a tune that has been in my head all morning long, and I guess I shouldn't be surprised that this is the song I woke up singing this morning and have had in my head all day long because it relates directly to the message today. Now, we're continuing in Esther. If you haven't been here in recent weeks, that's our study. We're in the sermon series of Examining the Invisible Hand of God. We're looking at this book of the Bible where the name of God is never mentioned, but you can see God present through the whole thing. We've been having this reminder of even when we can't see God moving, we know He is still there and at work. The book of Esther is so powerful in the reminders of the things God does, even when we can't see Him moving. It's an awesome reminder. Now, we've been in Esther for a few weeks. We still have just a few weeks left to go through our series here, but we kind of hit the middle point today, and we hit what's probably the most well-known chapter and some of the most well-known verses of the book of Esther. So this morning we're on part 4 of our study, and the message is called For Such a Time as This. And that's obviously a quote from Scripture, from Esther chapter 4, when we see Mordecai, one of the greats of this book of the Bible, says to Esther, says, who knows if you have been placed here for such a time as this? This wonderful reminder that maybe God is doing something in your life if you're willing to say yes to Him and go where He leads you. I mean, that's the crux of the story of Esther. Even though some major things happen and we see God's sovereignty and God's power on display, really, it comes down to somebody being willing to say yes to God even when the circumstances are difficult. To trust that God is in control and that He has a plan. That's what Esther is about. It's a young woman who comes from nowhere, who has been brought into this place she didn't expect, she didn't ask for, but once she's there, she has an opportunity to do something awesome for God, and she trusts in His provisions. I love that. And so, every week we've been studying through this Esther, we've been talking about the grand theme of God's at work, even when we can't see Him moving. But each week has kind of had its own little sub-lesson, something we need to take away from it. And so it is with today. And I think this is one of the most important lessons we're going to learn in Esther. So before we read, let's look at the main point. I want you to kind of get the main thing for today. It's this: saying yes to God can lead to amazing things. I want you to realize that saying yes to God, when He puts you in that place for such a time as this, whatever your circumstances are, which they're going to be different than Esther's, obviously, but He puts you in a place and you've got to, He's leading you and you have a decision to make. amazing things happen when you learn to say yes to God. When you learn to step out of the comfort zone, and when you learn to open your mouth and start speaking the words that He'll provide, when you're willing to go to those places you didn't expect you had to go to, do the things you didn't know you'd be involved with, when you say yes to God, amazing things can happen. And that's really what we see in this part of the story of Esther. So again, this morning we're in chapter 4 of Esther. We're going to just look through the chapter this morning. Now, before, again, we just read those verses, I'll be quick. Most of you have been here and you've been aware of what's going on. But in case you've missed it, be reminded of this. The story of Esther takes place when the Jews are in a foreign land being ruled by a foreign leader. Things are not good. It's a down and difficult time for God's people. We've seen the characters of the story introduced to us over the past few weeks. We see the king, King Ahasuerus, Xerxes, as he's also known. We see that he's not a good guy. We see he's got real no love for anything other than himself. We saw the first week he got rid of his queen because she displeased him. And we've seen Mordecai and Esther, two Jews who are now in this foreign land and captives there, who they love the Lord and they trust Him no matter the circumstances. Mordecai is willing to do whatever the Lord leads him to, and his niece, Esther, is plucked out of nowhere and made the new queen over this whole grand empire. Although nobody in the kingdom, nobody, the other rulers, the king, doesn't know she's Jewish. But she is brought from obscurity to the top of the ranks. Last week we got introduced to a guy named Haman, the one who hates the Jews. That he has a deep-seated prejudice that goes back generations and generations. And because he got offended at Mordecai, he used that to say, let's get rid of all of them. That's where we ended our reading in our study of last week, that as Haman and the king sat in the throne room eating and drinking and having a good time, the edict of the day of the Jews' destruction was being sent out to all the provinces and to all the people, and the Jews were in the streets weeping and wailing because they had just had their death warrant signed. They'd just been told, on this date in a few months, we're taking arms against you and we're going to wipe out this whole race of people. So we left it on kind of a dark note. What's going to happen? And we've continued to say, well, we got to trust in God that He is doing things even when we can't see He's moving. And so we begin to see the birth of that this morning as we look at chapter 4. We begin to see how some of the things God is putting into place is preparing for Him to do a mighty, mighty work. But it is still going to come down to one person being willing to say yes to what God is doing. So we're going to begin reading here in the book of Esther, chapter 4. We'll do a read through. We'll stop a couple times and see what God has for us. Let's put our scripture up on the screen this morning as we start going through it. Starting in verse 1, it says this: when Mordecai learned all that had been done, that's the edict that went out to destroy the Jews, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, in case you don't know, that's not a tradition we maybe carry on today, but what was going on is this sackcloth and ashes, it was a way to say, I want my outward appearance to reflect how my insides are feeling. It was to say, I am mourning, and obviously they're all upset. The whole nation, the whole race is saying, we've just had an execution date set for us. What are we going to do? So they've been crying and weeping and putting on the sackcloth and ashes and showing how distressed they are. Now Mordecai does something interesting, because normally when you're in that state of mourning, when they in the Bible times, the sackcloth and ashes, it was not really designed to be some public display. You weren't supposed to go out. Even Jesus spoke about this. You weren't supposed to go out there and show everybody, hey, look at me. Look how, pious I am, and I'm willing to be in sackcloth and ashes and look this way and feel this way for my faith. That wasn't the point of it. But Mordecai knew that his niece, Esther, the now queen, didn't know what was going on. So not only did he make his outside look how his inside felt, but he says, I'm going to go to the place so I can get Esther's attention. He goes to the city gate. He goes and he continues to sit there where he normally would be and mourn and wait and trust in God. And let's begin to see what happens. We'll read several verses here. Now, in verse 4, it says this, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. See, she's like, hey, don't do this. I mean, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing to be acting like this. And you're public. She's saying, no, put on these clothes. He refused her, right? Verse 5, then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and to learn what this was and why it was. Verse 6 says this, Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach, commanded him to go to Mordecai and say the following. Look, he says, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. We're going to stop here for just a second and kind of get a picture of what's going on. Everybody, all the Jews are aware that a law has been written that they're about to be destroyed, right? Haman had said, hey, if we kill them all, we'll get all their money, all their possessions, and they got a lot of it. And the king said, sounds good to me. They picked that they thought it was a favorable day and says, on this day, you're all dead. They sent out the news. How would you like getting in the mail the notice says, hey, in 6 months from now, we're coming to execute you? Can you imagine the feeling that must have come across them? Here's the news. Here's the edict. It's been signed into law. It can't be revoked. And so they're all weeping and wailing, and they all realize it except for who? Esther and that small group around her, because they're so sheltered from what's happening in the rest of the whole kingdom. They don't know what's going on. So Mordecai, he says, I've got to get word to her. He goes to the king's gate. Esther finds out he's there. He's mourning. She says, stop it. He says, I can't, and here's why. And he sends back to her the message of saying, here's the proof. I'm not making this up. He signed our death warrant. They're going to take all of our stuff, and you should go to the king and beg him for our people. Go talk to him. And notice what she comes back with. She says, everybody knows that you just don't walk into the king's presence. In fact, in that day, it says, if you just go to the king without being summoned, it is the law that you be put to death. How about that? I mean, it's not just whether the king's in a good mood or not. It says, if you go and you haven't been called, death. Not a very nice place to live, is it? Right? Can you imagine living under that? I remember a pastor I knew one time. He was in a different country, different culture. But I went to visit with him, and he had a bell on his desk. And he had trained his folks, I tell you, this is amazing, to say, they did not enter until they heard his little bell, ding. And I tell you what, it's the most amazing thing. Somebody would knock on his door, and they would wait until ding. And I was there one time, I heard a knock on the door, But he was talking with me and talking with others. 10 minutes passed, 15 minutes passed, and finally he goes, ding. That person had not moved from the other side of the door. They would not come in. You know what? I came home from that trip and said, I'm getting a bell for my desk at my office. Like, nobody comes until I ding, you got to come in. That was the king, right? Unless he dings, you're in. You don't do it. You can't do it. I mean, if you just burst in my office, what's the worst? You're going to get a dirty look, and even then, how dare you, right? You do that to the king. He didn't ding you in. Death. Kind of a strict place to live, would you say? And so Esther's saying, wait a second, you know the rule. If I just show up in his presence, unless he has mercy on me and he extends this golden scepter as a sign that it's okay, unless that happens, I am immediately going to be put to death. And she's basically saying, what good will this have served if I go in there and just am killed immediately? You want me to go stand up for our people, but I walk in there, I'm probably dead. And, you know, it's been 30 days since he's called me. It's not like I'm going there every afternoon. He hadn't wanted to speak to me in a while. So, Mordecai, what are you asking me to do? You get the tough situation. I want you to get the extreme nature of this is not just some simple request. If I say to you, go talk to somebody, you might say, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? They're going to say no. For her, the worst that could happen is she'd been killed. So she's really at a place, well, what am I to do? Now, here we come with wise Mordecai. I love Mordecai because he is a man who seeks the Lord, and he can see that invisible hand of God. I mean, he kind of understands what God is up to. And I want you to see his words back to Esther because they're so powerful and they give us a few reminders. Look at this in verse 12. It says this, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. Listen to his reply. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I love Mordecai's response here. I mean, it's full of wisdom and teaches us some important things today. Again, Esther goes back and says, I'm going to die. It's law that I can't walk in there. And Mordecai is kind of already hinting at, you know that God has brought you to this unique place. You weren't asking to be queen. You didn't go look for it. You were plucked out of nowhere. You found favor in all that you did, and God has placed you here for a reason and for a purpose. And then he tells you, says, don't think for a second that your situation will protect you. He says, if you say no, guess what, Esther? Then deliverance for our people will come from another place. Mordecai said this, and wow. He said this because he knows something about God. God doesn't break his promises. Because God's promises are not promises, they're covenants. And covenants are bonds that are not broken. And God said that these will be my people, and they will not be destroyed. They will not be wiped off the face of the earth. And he promised it, and he wrote it down, and he committed to them that he will sustain them and keep them. And Mordecai knew that. So he's saying, Esther, God is ready to use you where you are. But even if you say no, don't think for a second that God's plan, that God's ability to save his people just hinges on you. He'll just do it another way. He'll raise up somebody else because God won't break his promise. Now, there's more to what Mordecai said. There's something that's really important in just a moment. But think about this. When God says, do this, when he has his plan, he has spoken to you about his promises, when he is pushing you a direction, if you say no, first of all, know that God's plans will not be thwarted just because you say no. What God has made a promise to, what God has made a covenant with, will not be broken just because you say no. Now, some of you may take this and use that information the wrong way. You may go home and say, well, I know I shouldn't say no to God. I know I should do what God is leading me to do, but you just told me if I say no, God will still accomplish His purposes anyway. So it's okay. Did you listen to what Mordecai said? He said, yes, God will bring about the deliverance even if you say no, but your name, your house will perish. Now that's kind of an odd word. How does Mordecai know that? Is he saying you're going to die? No, he's not quite saying that. You know, to a Jewish person, the worst thing you could ever say to them is, may your name and your family be erased. Just basically stop the heritage, right? That is one of the worst curses you could say to somebody of a Jewish lineage. It's a terrible thing to say. And that's what he's saying is if you say no to God, yes, God's purposes will still come about. He will still find a way to deliver His people, but you, your name, your family, is going to perish. It is gone. So he's trying to say, yeah, you can say no to God. God will still get things done, but the price, the consequence for saying no is a much heavier price than you want to pay. And that's what, friends, we need to remember. When God is leading us, when He is pushing us, He's knocking on the heart and says, child of mine, do this. And we say, no, God, I don't want to. I'm not comfortable with it. That's too scary. That's too big of a step to take. When we say that to God, now God's purposes will still be accomplished because God doesn't break a promise. He doesn't break a covenant. But when we say no to God, we are going to pay a price more heavy than we ever want to. We are removing ourselves from the blessing of God and basically ultimately placing a curse upon ourselves of what we are when we're saying no. Now, God restores and God redeems and God gives second chances because we've all said no to God, right? I don't want you to think that you said no to God at one time and your life is ruined from then on. But I tell you, when you say no to God, what happens is you miss so many blessings. So many things that could have happened in your life and been brought about if you had simply said, yes, I know this is scary. You think it was scary for Esther? I got to go before the king and he could kill me like that. It's not just getting rejected. It's not just having my position taken away. It's my very life. It was scary. But Mordecai is saying, it's going to cost you more than you want if you say no now. And then he gives that famous reminder, for who knows, maybe you've been placed here for such a time as this. That's Mordecai's way to say to his niece, to say to Esther, can't you see what God has been up to? Can't you see how God is behind this? How is it possible that you, some just random girl from the humongous kingdom, have been placed as the wife of the king? Can't you see what God is doing? For such a time as this, this is why you are here. See, when God calls us to move, when God pushes us out, when He says, get out of the boat, when He says, go unto my people and preach the message, whatever it is to you, whatever He calls us to do, if you'll stop and consider it for a moment, you'll see that God has placed you there for such a time as this. There's always still going to be a decision of faith. You still have to be willing to step out and do and go. But God will have been putting things around you for you to go, oh, yeah, that's why this was happening in my life. That's why these strange things I did not understand are coming about. God loves to orchestrate things you weren't even aware that He was doing, so that when He says, get up and go, you can go, oh, yeah, He's been preparing me for this. And that's what Mordecai is saying to Esther. He goes, this is not some random request. Can't you see God has placed you here for such a time as this? Now it's on Esther, right? Now Esther has the choice. She has the decision to say yes or to say no. Yes, I'll step out in faith and I'll go to the king. Or no, it's not worth me risking my life. Yes or no. Look at her response. We're going to look at the last few verses of the chapter. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Esther's response, her yes, should really teach us some things. First of all, she said yes. She goes, okay, I understand it's against the law, and I might die. She was not given any promise that it wouldn't cost her her life. She goes, I might die doing this. But yes. But before I actually move on, she says what? I want to be spiritually prepared and ready before the Lord, because she knew she needed guidance, discernment. She needed wisdom. As we're going to see in a couple of upcoming chapters as we kind of get the rest of the story, we're going to see how this woman knew how to take some very specific steps and have just right timing. And she goes, I know that I'm going to need God to lead me through this. So instead of just jumping in, she didn't say, okay, Mordecai, I guess I'll do it. I'm on my way to see the king. She says, no. Let's take 3 days. 3 days. You got to get all of them together. Start fasting. And with fasting comes what? Prayer. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to completely isolate ourselves for 3 days. And we're going to just be on our faces before God, so that in 3 days I'm going to go before the king. And I'm trusting in that moment, God's got this. He's going to show me what to do and what to say and how to act. And I'm going to do this. But I'm not going to just go, okay, I guess I'll figure it out. See, a lot of us make this mistake here. We feel God saying, go do this. And then we go, okay, God, I'll say yes to you, but I'm going to write out my own instructions for how to do it. I'm going to come up with my own plan. I'll say yes to you, God, but I'm going to control how I do the situation. Esther says, yes, Lord, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to try to write out the plan. I'm instead going to get on my face and seek you. And I'm going to get everybody around me of the same mind and same heart. They're going to start seeking you. And we're going to be spiritually ready, because the battle was not there right before the king. It was in the spiritual realm, friends. And she says, we're going to be ready, so when I go to the king, we're good. She's basically saying, when I go to the king, if I die, then I trust at that point that was the best and then part of the plan, the next step of God's plan for however He's going to accomplish this. Maybe it's going to take my life, maybe. But maybe not. Maybe God's going to have something else. But we're going to fast and we're going to pray, then I'll go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Wow. Esther, what a woman, huh? What an example of faith to say, yes, God, but I'm not going to do it my way. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to pray and I'm going to fast. She said, yes, Lord, yes. And to this day, even though we haven't got to the rest of the story, even though we